It's February 8th here in Seoul, and I'm Kim Dami. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour. Starting with President Yoon Suk-yeol's televised New Year interview on Wednesday. The South Korean leader once again pledged tight security commitment against growing threats coming from the north. Yoon also noted that his wife's controversial acceptance of a luxury handbag was caused by a lack of cold-heartedness. North Korea says the regime has gotten rid of laws and agreements related to inter-Korean economic cooperation between the South and the North, while the U.S. Treasury Department believes Pyongyang continues to conduct illicit activities to fund its weapons of mass destruction capabilities. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has rejected Hamas's proposed ceasefire deal. Instead, he says a total victory in Gaza is possible within months. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is still hopeful a deal can be reached. President Yoon Suk-yeol held a New Year's interview on local TV to talk about key issues on the peninsula and abroad. Beginning with security and diplomacy, he made clear that there will be no inter-Korean summit just for show. Our Choi Min-jung starts us off.
South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol hinted that an inter-Korean summit could be possible only if it guaranteed results. Speaking in an interview on KBS TV on Wednesday, Yoon said this would only happen using a bottom-up approach.
북이 핵을 포기하든 안 하든 남북 정상회담 할 수 있습니다. 이것이 탑다운 방식으로 해서는 곤란하고요. 버텀업 방식으로 양국의 실무자들 간의 어떤 교류와 이런 논의가 진행을 되면서 의제도 만들어 놓고 또 거기에 대해서 결과를 조금 준비를 해놓고 정상회담을 해야 되는 것이지.
Yoon also said South Korea is capable of developing its own nuclear weapons in a short period of time, but stressed that doing so would be, quote, unrealistic, as it would entail serious economic sanctions. He underlined that compliance with the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty is more in line with South Korea's national interests. Describing the regime as, quote, an irrational force, the president added that the South must prepare to counter not only actions based on rational judgments, but also actions based on irrational conclusions. At the same time, Yoon said he would like to provide humanitarian aid to North Korea to help improve the lives of people there. The president also touched upon relations with South Korea's allies, the U.S. and Japan. Yoon showed confidence that the Seoul-Washington alliance will not be affected by the upcoming U.S. presidential election.
작년에 왔던 그 미 상원의원단이 어떤 의미 있는 얘기를 하시더군요. President changes, but Congress stands still이라는 얘기를 하더라고요. 저희는 뭐 한미 간의 관계는 동맹을 더 강화하고 동맹을 더 업그레이드 하느냐 아니냐의 문제이지 저는 뭐 큰 적이 없을 거라고 보고 있습니다.
And regardless of South Korea's recent rulings on forced labor compensation, Yoon stressed that Seoul-Tokyo relations have been restored. He explained that the ties were normalized last year as security cooperation between the two sides, as well as with the U.S., has become crucial against North Korea's nuclear threats. Regarding relations with China, Yoon said he doesn't think the basic principles of national policy and diplomacy are different between Seoul and Beijing, adding there is no need to be overly concerned. On Ukraine, the president said the supply chain issues emerging from the war can only be solved through international cooperation, and noted that South Korea is making various efforts to prevent any risks. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
Now, turning over to domestic politics, President Yoon says this year he'll push so that people can feel his policies. He also took the interview as an opportunity to share his thoughts on personal issues. Our Kim Do-yeon with details.
On the domestic side of the 90-minute interview with KBS, President Yoon Suk-yeol had the chance to dive deep into his policy vision for 2024.
제가 취임하고 2022년, 2023년 한 하반기까지는 저희 국정 기조를 제대로 정착시키는 걸 우선으로 했고 작년 하반기부터는 현장을 저희가 중시하고 또 부처 간의 그 벽화물기를 이제 시행을 하면서 금년에는 더욱더 하여튼 국민들께서 손에 잡히는 체감하는 어떤 그 정책 성과를 이룰 수 있도록 노력할 생각입니다.
While he also reiterated some specific policy plans that he's already announced during the livelihood policy discussions, such as those related to inflation, the stock market, medical reform, and childcare support. In the pre-recorded program, he took a deep dive into topics that he's never shared with the public, like his approval ratings.
좀 국민들이 야속하세요? 열심히 노력하는 걸 못
그렇지
알아주시는 것
않습니다.
같아서.
저는 이런 지지율의 추이를 보면은 만족하는 건 아니지만 국제 이런 금리가 높고 이렇게 하다 보니까 외국도 다 지금 경기가 많이 위축돼 있습니다.
네.
그럼에도 불구하고 국민들께서 이 정도 제게 실망을 좀 덜 해주시는 것만으로도
네.
저는 뭐 감사하게 생각하고.
He also spoke about the opposition Democratic Party of Korea's holding of a supermajority in the National Assembly. Some policies needing the parliament's backing are stymied for Yoon, while the opposition can pass legislation without the ruling People Power Party's votes. So far, President Yoon has vetoed 9 bills sent from the National Assembly.
국회에서 이제 의결된 법이 행정부로 넘어오는 과정에서도 여야의 좀 충분한 이런 수기가 제대로 이루어지지 않았다는 점들이 많이 아쉽습니다.
He also touched on a bill that was recently passed with bipartisan support, the ban on dog meat, which gained global attention. While it was passed with overwhelming support by the public, some were opposed to the idea, such as the dog meat traders.
개식용에 대한 금지 법률은 이제 이 정도 국민들이 이런 문화나 이런 것이 바뀌었다고 한다면은 이제는 추진할 수 있는 거 아니냐. 첨단 과학 기술이 이렇게 발전한 나라인데 해외에서 또 우리 한국에 대해서 실망할 수도 있고.
One of the most anticipated moments, however, was the first time President Yoon gave his view on the recent, quote, Dior bag scandal. A Korean-American pastor who knows First Lady Kim Gun-hee's father recorded himself with a hidden camera handing her a $2,200 Dior bag in 2022. Yoon during the interview called it a political maneuver as it was released just before the upcoming general election. However, he did emphasize that it was something that should not be repeated.
자꾸 오겠다고 하고 해서 제가 보기에는 좀 그거를 매정하게 좀 끊지 못한 것이 좀 어떤 문제라는 문제고 좀 아쉽지 않았나 생각이 되는데.
In addition, the program included the first tour of his office at the Yongsan presidential office following a move from the presidential Blue House, which included presents given to Yoon by other leaders from around the world. 김도현, Arirang News.
North Korea has abolished laws and agreements related to inter-Korean economic cooperation between the two Koreas. According to the North State-run media on Thursday, a plenary session of the Supreme People's Assembly meeting on Wednesday saw the abolition of the Inter-Korean Exchange and Cooperation Act, the Mount Kumgangsan International Tourism Special Zone Act, and its enforcement regulations and agreements related to inter-Korean economic cooperation. The unilateral scrapping of all inter-Korean economic agreements is a sign that the North will not engage in any economic exchanges with the South amid tension on the Korean Peninsula. Now, according to the U.S. Treasury Department, North Korea continues to push ahead with its illicit activities, from staging cyber activities to mobilizing IT workers to meet its ambitions for weapons mass destruction. And Russia appears to be no different. Moon Hae-ryun has more.
The United States has identified Russia and North Korea as the highest risk threat actors due to their illicit procurement and revenue generation efforts. A review of data on North Korea's cyber activity came in the 2024 National Proliferation Financing Risk Assessment, released on Thursday by the U.S. Treasury Department, along with separate reports on money laundering and terrorist financing. Proliferation financing refers to the act of providing funds supporting activities regarding weapons of mass destruction. And in this latest report, the US claims that North Korea's malicious use of cyber technology and IT workers has funded its WMD capabilities through hacking and ransomware attacks. Washington estimates that roughly $1.7 billion worth of virtual assets was stolen by the regime in 2022, and that Pyongyang will continue to increase its use of cyber theft and illicit trade to raise revenue for its WMD program. The report cited the numerous intercontinental ballistic missile tests conducted throughout 2022 and 2023, as well as the employment of ICBM technology to launch a military satellite as proof that the regime is bolstering its military capabilities. It also discussed North Korea's relationship with Russia as another concern, stating that with the regime's assistance in providing military equipment and munitions to Russia for the war in Ukraine, Moscow could in turn reciprocate by providing military assistance to Pyongyang. In a podcast conducted by The Washington Post on Wednesday, the U.S. Deputy National Security Advisor for Cyber and Emerging Tech, Ann Neuberger, also spoke out on North Korea's use of tech to fund their WMD program. She claimed that the North's creative and innovative methods to glean billions of dollars meant that the U.S. needed to re-evaluate standards of red teaming and data training. Red teaming is a structured testing effort that simulates a real cyber attack to identify vulnerabilities in cybersecurity. Over the coming weeks, the U.S. Treasury Department plans to combine the data from the risk assessments to release the 2024 National Strategy for Combating Terrorist and Other Illicit Finance. 문혜련, Arirang News.
Instead of choosing to visit grandparents or relatives, planning for an overseas trip during Lunar New Year holidays is no longer an unfamiliar scene here in South Korea. And it seems like such holidays are still being planned despite high interest rates and inflation. We turn to Professor Bae So-young this morning. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for joining us. People traveling abroad during national holidays, I'm sure this year's Seollal is no exception, is it?
Yeah, so many people are choosing travel over family gathering during this Lunar New Year holiday. And during this holiday period, over about 1 million people are expected to travel overseas. Especially on the 12th of the February, the Incheon airport will have around 200,000 passengers. And it's going to be the busiest day of the holiday period since the COVID-19 pandemic. And the number of total outbound travelers, which decreased to 1.2 million back in 2021, has increased to over 20 million last year. And this represents a recovery to about 70% of the pre-pandemic level.
That is a dramatic jump, but like I mentioned earlier, high interest rates and high inflation have been such headaches for many people here in South Korea, yet people are traveling overseas more and more. What's the reason for this?
Yeah, because of high interest rates and high inflation, almost all consumption has really shrunk. But demand for travel, it's actually exploding. So especially during this holiday season, sales of overseas travel packages are really booming. Such phenomenon can be fully explained by still pent-up demand for overseas travel, which had been fully suppressed during the pandemic period. And also, it's possibly because Koreans feel relatively more comfortable to make overseas travel and overseas consumption due to the severe inflation rate in Korea right now.
Definitely. Then we have to talk about the popular destinations among people. Now, which country is the most popular destination this year then?
Well, Koreans prefer traveling nearby destinations like Asia, constituting almost 80% of their outbound travel choices. In 2023, Japan, Vietnam, and Thailand emerged as the top preferred destinations, and it's anticipated that there will be a similar trend during this Lunar New Year holiday as well. Japan particularly has gained immense popularity among Koreans in recent years because of its proximity and also favorable exchange rate. So it has contributed to its status as a popular destination. Compared to the steep price hikes at domestic tourist destinations, overseas destinations like Japan are showing high satisfaction level among domestic tourists, and also they offer better value for money.
So it sounds like the closer, the more popular. It's good that we now have more freedom to travel around the world, but I'm sure this is not necessarily the best phenomenon for the domestic economy, is it?
Yeah, indeed. So Koreans are increasing their overseas consumption while extremely limiting their domestic spending to the bare minimum for survival. Domestic consumer spending has been decreasing gradually from 8.8% in the first quarter of the last year to 4.2% in the second quarter and 2.6% in the third quarter. But in contrast, the overseas consumption of Korean residents has continued to soar, entering the 80% range in the fourth quarter of 2022 and maintaining levels above 80% throughout the first 3 quarters of the last year.
But Professor Bae, I'm pretty sure there are some incentives provided by the South Korean government for people to travel and enjoy the holidays within the country, right?
Yes. So to encourage domestic travel during this Lunar New Year holiday, for example, the government is distributing the accommodation discount coupons so that way people can travel more domestically. But the thing is, beyond such short-term measures to promote domestic travel, it will be very much essential to fully support tourism service providers and also industry as a whole. And the government needs to make more efforts, not only just to attract foreign tourists, but also to identify and address the pain points of domestic tourists in order to motivate them to make more domestic travel and also ultimately enhance their domestic travel satisfaction.
Definitely. All right, Professor Bae, thanks so much for joining us this morning. Happy Seollal and enjoy your holidays.
Happy Seollal as well. Thank you so much.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has rejected Hamas's proposed 135-day truce plan, insisting total victory in Gaza is possible within months. But U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken remains hopeful a deal can be struck. Lee Seung-jae has more.
With ongoing talks of a possible ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu rejected the Palestinian militant group's proposed ceasefire terms. The rejection comes as Hamas laid out a series of demands in response to an Israel-backed ceasefire proposal, with the Israeli leader saying that the negotiations with the group were not going anywhere, while describing their terms as bizarre. He added that there's no other solution but a complete and final victory in Gaza, hinting that the goal would be possible within months. Despite the clear rejection from Netanyahu, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who's currently in the Middle East, was still hopeful that a deal can be reached.
What I can tell you about these discussions is that while there are some clear non-starters in Hamas's response, we do think it creates space for agreement to be reached. And we will work at that relentlessly until we get there.
The comments come after Blinken met with the Israeli Prime Minister and discussed Hamas's counter-proposal to a ceasefire proposal drawn up by both the U.S. and Israeli spy chiefs before being sent to the militant group last week by Qatari and Egyptian mediators. The top U.S. diplomat has been traveling throughout the Middle East, conducting shuttle diplomacy on his 5th visit to the region since the Hamas attack on October 7th last year. Meanwhile, amid ongoing conflicts around the world, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres warned on Wednesday that the world has entered an age of chaos that is causing a multitude of suffering and thwarting progress. The UN chief pointed to conflicts in Gaza, Ukraine, and Sudan, but also the protracted situations in Myanmar, Yemen, Haiti, and across Africa's Sahel region. Guterres also slammed the UN Security Council for contributing to the chaos, adding while it's not the first time that the council has been divided, it is the worst. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Good morning. I'm Kim Ji-young, and now we turn over to stories from around the world. We begin today with the forest fires in Chile's central Valparaiso region, where the death toll as of Tuesday has risen to at least 131 and more than 300 are still missing. Chile's legal medical service stated that they have identified 35 of the deceased. The forensic medical service said that many bodies recovered were difficult to identify due to the severity of the burns. During his visit to the region, Chile President Gabriel Boric announced a plan to cover water bill costs and donate furniture used from the 2023 Pan American Games to the forest fire victims. The wildfires, which began last Friday, have burned almost 10,000 hectares in Valparaiso region, damaging thousands of homes. The fires are thought to be Chile's deadliest disaster since the 2010 earthquake. Moving over to Pakistan, where on the eve of the country's general election, 2 bomb blasts in the Balochistan region have killed at least 30 and wounded dozens. Late Wednesday local time, the Islamic State claimed responsibility for the attacks via a statement posted on Telegram Messenger. In response to the blasts, Pakistan has closed its western border crossings with Afghanistan and Iran until Friday to tighten security during the election. Both blasts took place in the troubled southwestern region of Balochistan. The first attack near the election campaign office of an independent candidate in Pishin killed 18 and wounded at least 30. The second attack, less than an hour later, was at an election office for the ultra-conservative Jamiat Ulema-e-Islam party, which killed at least 12, leaving dozens more injured. The JUI party was the target of 2 suicide attacks by the Islamic State just last year. According to a Kremlin spokesperson, American news host Tucker Carlson interviewed Russian President Vladimir Putin in Moscow on Tuesday. The former Fox News host becomes the first Western journalist to conduct a one-on-one interview since Russia's full-scale war began with Ukraine. In a video posted on Carlson's X social media account, he said Americans have a right to know all they can about a war that they are implicated in. While the interview itself has not been released yet, Carlson's visit to Moscow has been reported to the detail of his every move in Russian state media. Carlson also said he paid for the trip himself and that this purpose was to create a balance with the Ukraine-dominated coverage by Western media. Belgium has banned the import of animal hunting trophies from rare or endangered species. This includes items such as ashtrays made from elephant feet and lion claw bottle openers. The country's Environment Minister Zakia Katabi said on Tuesday that the ban is more symbolic than groundbreaking, as products coming into Belgium could still enter through other EU countries which don't yet have such restrictions. The Belgian Parliament voted in late January to ban the imports of products made from endangered animals such as alligators, tigers and rhinos. The Humane Society International said that some 25,000 animal trophies were imported into the European Union from 2014 to 2022.
Good morning. It's the eve of the Seollal holiday and the weather looks promising for most parts of the country. But those in the south of Gyeonggi-do and Chungcheong-do provinces will have high levels of ultrafine dust today, so have a quality face mask handy. The day of Seollal on Saturday looks to be a wet one with rain and snow in the forecast for some western regions, that's including Chungcheong-do and Jeollado provinces, while a mix of rain and snow is in the forecast for Jeju on Sunday. Then the last day of the holiday will be a sunny and toasty one nationwide. Now back to today's forecast. It's a colder start to the day than yesterday, but highs will go up 1 to 4 degrees higher than Wednesday. Skies will be brighter this afternoon with an expected high of 9 degrees in Daegu, 8 degrees over in Gwangju. When we come back from the 4-day holiday weekend, we'll notice much warmer temperatures next week, starting to feel more like spring. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
That is all we have at this hour. We'll be back next week on Tuesday after the Lunar New Year holidays. Thanks for watching.